Helena Greenwood was born on 26 August 1949. She was a talented British biochemist who had studied at Sheffield and London universities. In 1977, she moved to America with her husband Roger Franklin, and after they had traveled around the USA for a year, they settled in a town called Atherton in Silicon Valley, where Helena worked as a research analyst specializing in DNA. All went well until on April 7, 1984, Helena was alone in her house as Roger was out of town on business. At around 11:20 p.m., a man named David Frediani broke into the house through the kitchen window. He held Helena at gunpoint for several hours. Helena courageously tried to resist his advances to no avail. He sexually assaulted her and robbed her. During long conversations, she persuaded him not to kill her and convinced him that she would not contact the police. Once he had left, she called the police. Frediani was not masked, but he was wearing a hooded sweatshirt that covered his entire face except for his eyes. Helena gives David's description to the police. On the same day, Helena called a close friend to come to take her to the hospital. While waiting for Helena outside, this friend noticed a teapot on the ground outside the kitchen window and alerted Helena. Helena explained that the teapot should have been on the windowsill, which is where she had left it after making herself a cup of tea before bed. Thanks to their quick thinking, police were able to lift a usable fingerprint off the teapot's lid. The fingerprint didn't match any prints in the system, but police caught a break 10 months later when they came across a report of a man caught exposing himself to a 12-year-old girl in nearby Belmont. Like Helena's attacker, this man had worn a hooded sweatshirt covering his face. The man's name was David Paul Frediani, and the police were eager to talk to him. In 1984, David was a 30-year-old accountant with no priors, and he confidently feigned ignorance when police questioned him about Helena's burglary and sexual assault. But when police confronted him with the damning fingerprint evidence, David's demeanor immediately changed. Detectives recall him trembling with fear before stammering that he had been drunk at the time of the crime and didn't know what he was doing. He then clammed up and asked for a lawyer. At an initial court hearing, Frediani, who faced a 20-year sentence for the assault and death threats, was granted bail. His trial was scheduled for the summer of 1985. In the meantime, Greenwood was approached by the research company GenProbe of San Diego and offered a post of vice president and a chance to continue her DNA research, working on the reading of gene sequences. The couple moved south and found a house outside the city in Del Mar and continued to take safety precautions as Frediani was still at large. Then, on August 22, 1985, Helena failed to show up to work for an important meeting. As someone who habitually arrived at 9:00 a.m. on the dot every morning, her co-workers immediately sensed that something was wrong and called her husband. Roger had left for work earlier than Helena that day. When he rushed home, he found Helena's strangled and beaten body in their garden. The crime seemed intensely personal. After all, who would strangle someone in broad daylight and then stage the scene to look like a robbery gone wrong? The answer was obvious to Roger and the police: David Frediani. Helena was supposed to testify at David's trial in 3 weeks. Police couldn't have asked for a stronger motive. Whoever the attacker was, it was clear that Helena fought like hell to defend herself. It was as if she knew she would die and was desperate to secure DNA evidence as she frantically clawed at her attacker. Unfortunately, the only physical evidence police could collect were minuscule skin particles from underneath her fingernails that were too tiny for DNA analysis. Furthermore, even though David had been in the area shortly before the murder, nothing concrete could tie him to the crime. Police had no evidence that linked Frediani to the body. He stood trial for the sexual assault, was convicted on the basis of the statements that Helena had made earlier. He was jailed for 6 years. But although detectives were certain that Frediani was the killer, they were unable to get sufficient evidence to bring the case to court. Frediani was released after serving only 3 years. In 1999, San Diego police reopened around 300 unsolved murders to see whether new scientific techniques would help them to find the perpetrators. In the 14 years since Helena's murder, exciting developments had occurred in the field of DNA research, most notably the advent of the PCR method, which allowed scientists to replicate a microscopic sample of DNA until it was a useful size. Those skin particles under Helena's fingernails that had been too tiny for analysis back in 1985 were now definitively shown to be a match to David Frediani. It was a bittersweet reminder that Helena's career in DNA research and her dying efforts weren't in vain. In 1999, David was finally arrested and charged with Helena's murder. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Sadly, Roger died of cancer before he could see justice for his wife. Helena's father, Sidney, from Leamington, Hampshire, who is suffering from cancer, welcomed the news and congratulated the police on their persistence.